I accused my son of stealing. The truth destroyed me. I called the police on my own son. 3 weeks later, I found out the real thief was someone I trusted more than anyone else in that building. Here's the thing about being a parent. You think you know your kid. You think you can read every little change in their face, every shift in their voice. I thought that too. Right up until the day I picked up the phone, called the police, and reported my 16-year-old son for stealing. I had what I thought was solid proof. I had a pattern of behavior that lined up perfectly. I had a missing key, missing cash, and a son who wouldn't look me in the eye. This isn't one of those stories where I'm going to tell you I had a gut feeling that turned out to be right. This is the opposite kind of story. This is the kind where every instinct I trusted led me somewhere completely wrong, and the cost of that mistake landed entirely on the one person I was supposed to protect more than anyone else in the world. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what I saw, why I made the call I made, and the one piece of footage that flipped my entire world upside down. Because the truth wasn't just different from what I believed. It was the complete opposite. And what it cost us to get there is something I think about every single day. I want to give you some background first, because you need to understand who we were before any of this happened. It was just me and Caleb. That's not his real name, but that's what I'll call him here. His dad left when Caleb was 7, and after that it was just the two of us against the world, or at least that's how it felt some days. I worked as a shift manager at a small pharmacy called Riverside, the kind of place where everybody in the neighborhood knows your name and your business. Caleb was 16, a junior in high school, played a little bit of baseball, not great at it, but he loved it anyway. We weren't rich. Money was tight more often than not. Rent went up every year, my paycheck didn't keep up the same way, and there were months I genuinely didn't know how the math was going to work out. Caleb knew this. He saw me counting coins on the kitchen table more than once. He saw me skip things for myself, so he could have what he needed for school. I tell you all this because it matters. It matters for understanding why, when money started disappearing, my mind went exactly where it went. There was something else too. When Caleb was 13, he got caught shoplifting a pack of trading cards from a corner store. It wasn't some massive crime. It was a 13-year-old kid being dumb, the way 13-year-old kids sometimes are. The owner caught him, called me instead of the cops, and I made Caleb apologize, pay it back with chores, the whole thing. We moved past it. Or at least I thought we did. But here's something nobody tells you about trust. Once it cracks, even a hairline crack, it never fully closes back up the same way. I loved my son with everything I had. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that one moment from when he was 13 sat there quietly, waiting. I didn't know it yet, but that old crack was about to become the lens I saw everything through. Our life wasn't dramatic before any of this. It was small and ordinary in the best way. Tuesday nights we'd split a pizza and watch whatever baseball game was on, even teams neither of us actually cared about. Sunday mornings he'd make scrambled eggs, because I worked the early shift, and they were always slightly burnt on one side, and I always ate them anyway, and told him they were perfect. He used to leave little notes on the fridge before school, dumb little jokes mostly, just to make me laugh when I got home tired. I bring this up, because I want you to understand we weren't a broken family limping along. We were a tired family, a stretched thin family, but we were close. That's part of what made everything that happened later hurt so much. It wasn't two strangers who drifted apart over years. It was two people who loved each other deeply, watching that closeness get knocked sideways in the space of a few short weeks. It started small. So small I almost didn't notice. At work, I was the one who closed out the register most nights. Riverside Pharmacy wasn't huge, but we moved a decent amount of cash through that till, especially around the holidays. One Friday night, I closed out and we were $40 short. $40 isn't the end of the world. Tills come up short sometimes. People make change wrong, somebody forgets to log a return. I wrote it off. Then it happened again the next week. Then again 2 weeks after that. Never a huge amount, always somewhere between $30 and $60, always on nights when the store was a little busier than usual and a little more chaotic. I started double counting the drawer myself before I even closed up, twice, sometimes 3 times, convinced I was the one making the mistake. Each time the number came back the same. Short. I started keeping a little notebook in my purse where I wrote down the date and the amount, like I was building a case file, without even realizing that's exactly what I was doing. Around the same time, I started noticing things at home too. I kept a small amount of cash in a tin in my closet, money I was saving up slowly for Caleb's car insurance once he got his license. One day I went to add to it, and there was less in there than I remembered leaving. I told myself I miscounted. I told myself I was tired, that I'd had a long week, that numbers get fuzzy in your head sometimes. But then Caleb showed up with a brand new pair of sneakers. Nice ones, the kind that cost more than I made in half a day. When I asked where he got the money, he said he'd been mowing lawns for a guy a few streets over. Fine, okay, that's possible. Kids do that. A week later, he had a new phone case, the expensive kind with the certified drop protection, and cash in his wallet that I definitely had not given him. Every single time I asked, the answer was vague. I've been doing odd jobs. A friend paid me back. I picked up some work. Nothing concrete. Nothing I could check. And every time I pushed a little harder, he got quiet, almost annoyed, like the questions themselves bothered him more than they should have. I remember standing in his doorway holding up that phone case, turning it over in my hands like it was a piece of evidence at a crime scene, asking him flat out, "Where did this come from, Caleb?" And he just shrugged, said "I told you, I've been working," and went back to whatever was on his laptop screen, not even looking up at me. That shrug bothered me more than almost anything else. It felt dismissive, like he didn't think I deserved a real answer. Looking back now, I think it was something closer to exhaustion. He'd already given me an honest answer once. Having to repeat it, knowing I didn't believe it the first time, probably felt pointless to him. I didn't know it then, but every one of those answers he gave me was actually a piece of the truth. He just wasn't ready to give me the whole picture yet. And because he wasn't ready, I started building my own picture instead. The wrong one. Once that little seed of suspicion plants itself in your head, it's almost impossible to stop it from growing. You start collecting evidence without even meaning to. Every single thing your kid does gets run through that filter. Caleb started coming home later than usual. Not crazy late, but later than his normal routine. When I asked where he'd been, he'd say out with friends, or studying at the library, answers that used to satisfy me without a second thought. Now they felt thin. Now I wanted names, times, proof. I noticed he was texting more, and angling his phone away from me when he did it. Any parent watching this knows that feeling, that little twist in your stomach, when your kid suddenly cares a lot more about privacy than they ever did before. What I didn't know was that most of those texts were just him and Walt working out a time and place to meet. Or him asking his friend Marcus to cover for him at practice for a few minutes while he ran groceries over to the church parking lot. None of it was anything close to what I imagined, but a phone screen flipped face down on a table doesn't come with a footnote explaining why. One night, I was doing laundry, and I found a small rubber-banded roll of cash in his hoodie pocket. Almost $200. For a 16-year-old with no real job that I knew of, that's not pocket change. That's a number that makes a parent's heart drop. I also remembered that Caleb still had a spare key to Riverside. Months earlier, I'd had him come in after hours a couple of times to help me restock shelves when I was short-staffed, and I never bothered taking the key back because, well, he was my son. Why would I need to? Put yourself in my shoes for a second. A spare key to the store where cash kept going missing. A sudden stack of cash with no clear source. New things appearing that he couldn't really explain. Secretive behavior. Late nights. A history, even a small one, of taking something that wasn't his. I also got a call from his school counselor around the same time. Just a routine check-in, nothing alarming on its own. She mentioned Caleb had seemed a little distracted in a couple of classes, a little tired some mornings, and asked if everything was okay at home. I told her things were fine, but I hung up that call with my stomach in knots, because in my head, distracted and tired got added straight to the pile of evidence too. I didn't stop to think that a kid quietly helping a homeless man and his grandson, on top of schoolwork and baseball practice and yard work, might actually just be tired from doing too much good, not too much bad. If you laid all of that out on a table, it looks like a pretty convincing case, doesn't it? That's exactly how it felt to me. Like the pieces were finally clicking into place. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known yet, is that every single one of those clues had a completely different explanation. The cash. The key. The lateness. The secrecy. All of it. But explanations don't show up on their own. Somebody has to ask the right question, in the right way, at the right time. And I wasn't asking. I was accusing, quietly, in my own head, long before I ever said a word out loud. I finally sat him down on a Sunday night. I remember it so clearly because I'd rehearsed what I was going to say in the shower that morning, like I was preparing for a job interview instead of a conversation with my own kid. I asked him straight out. Caleb, is there something going on with money I should know about? He looked at me, and for a second, just a second, something flickered across his face. Looking back now, I know exactly what that flicker was. It was him deciding whether or not this was the moment to tell me everything. It was him weighing whether I'd actually believe him if he did. He decided not to. He said, "No, Mom, I told you, I've been doing jobs around the neighborhood." I pushed harder. I told him about the till being short at work. I watched his face when I said it, looking for guilt, looking for that tell that every parent thinks they can spot. And maybe I saw something, or maybe I just saw what I expected to see, because at that point I'd already half convinced myself. He got defensive. Not aggressive, just shut down, arms crossed, voice flat. "I don't know anything about your work, Mom. Why are you asking me like I did something?" And honestly, that defensiveness, that shutting down, felt like confirmation to me. Isn't that exactly what someone with something to hide does? They get quiet, they get short, they stop giving details. I tried one more angle, asking about the key, asking why he still had it, whether he'd been by the store after hours without telling me. He said, "I haven't used that key in months, Mom. I don't even know where it is half the time," which, in hindsight, was probably true, since it almost certainly sat untouched in his backpack the entire time someone else was using their own access to take from that register. But in that moment, hearing him say he didn't know where it was just sounded like another dodge to me, another detail that didn't add up. I remember the silence that followed that exchange more than almost anything else from that night. It stretched out long enough that the refrigerator hum in the kitchen actually felt loud. He finally stood up and said, "Can I go to my room now?" Not really asking permission so much as telling me the conversation was over from his side. I let him go, because I didn't know what else to say, and because some small, scared part of me was almost relieved not to keep pushing, even while the bigger part of me filed his exit away, as one more thing that looked bad. Here's something I didn't understand back then that I understand now. A scared kid and a guilty kid can look almost identical from the outside. Caleb wasn't shutting down because he was guilty. He was shutting down because he was protecting something, or rather, someone, and he didn't know how to explain it without breaking a promise he'd made. I walked away from that conversation more convinced than ever. Not less. I want to be honest with you about the headspace I was in, because I think a lot of parents watching this will recognize it. I felt scared. Genuinely scared. I thought about the trading cards when he was 13, and I thought, what if this is the start of a pattern? What if I don't do something now, and 5 years from now he's facing real charges, serious ones, because nobody ever drew a hard line for him? I talked to my sister on the phone. I talked to a co-worker who'd gone through something similar with her own son. Most of what I heard back was some version of, tough love now is better than a bigger problem later. One person actually told me, if you don't correct this now, you're basically teaching him there's no consequence. That idea sat with me hard. The idea that staying quiet would be the same as giving permission. So here's what happened. The shortages at the register kept happening. My manager, who already knew Caleb had access to the store after hours, because of that spare key, started asking questions too. Between the missing cash at work, the missing cash at home, the unexplained spending, and that old shoplifting incident sitting in the back of my mind like a warning label, I made a decision. I told my manager about the key, about my suspicions, about the trading card incident years earlier. The store decided to involve the police, treating it as an internal theft case, and because I was the one connecting the dots, because I was the one who handed them the pieces, I was effectively the one who reported my own son. I told myself I was doing the responsible thing. The brave thing. The good parent who doesn't let love blind her to the truth thing. I had absolutely no idea how wrong I was. The night before I actually went to my manager with everything, I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold an hour before I even touched it, just turning the whole thing over and over in my head. Part of me kept replaying every parenting article I'd ever skimmed about not enabling bad behavior, about how kids need boundaries, about how looking the other way is its own kind of failure. Another part of me, a quieter part, kept whispering that this was Caleb, my Caleb, the kid who left dumb jokes on the fridge, and that something about this whole theory didn't sit right. I even pulled out my phone at one point and started typing a text to him, something simple, just hey, can we talk tomorrow, no judgment, I just want to understand. I sat there staring at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. I told myself a text wasn't serious enough, that this needed a real conversation, an official one. Looking back, I think the truth is simpler than that. I think some part of me was scared that a gentle question might get a gentle, honest answer, and I wasn't ready yet to let go of the version of events I'd already built in my head. I almost didn't go through with it. I actually stood up at one point, walked halfway to his room to just ask him one more time, gently this time, no edge in my voice. But then I thought about the register being short again that very week, and the spare key, and I sat back down and told myself I was being naive. I told myself love was clouding my judgment instead of the other way around. That's the part that haunts me the most, honestly. There was a window that night where I almost chose differently. I just didn't walk through it. I had absolutely no idea how wrong I was. I will never forget that afternoon as long as I live. 2 officers came to the house. Polite, professional, doing their job exactly the way they are trained to. They asked to speak with Caleb. I remember standing in the doorway of his room watching his face change from confusion, to disbelief, to something that looked a lot like betrayal. He looked at me before he looked at them. Just for a second. And in that look was a question that didn't need words. You did this? I didn't answer him out loud. I think some small part of me already knew I'd made a mistake, but the bigger, louder part of me was still holding on to that pile of evidence I'd built up in my head, telling myself this was for his own good. They asked him questions about the store, about the missing cash, about the key. They searched his room with my permission, since I was still his legal guardian. One of the officers picked up the jar of loose change on his dresser, the one he'd had since he was a little kid, and just held it for a second before setting it back down, and something about that small gentle gesture made the whole thing feel even more surreal. They found the cash in his hoodie, almost $200 at that point, the new sneakers, the phone case. To them, looking at it from the outside with no context, it probably looked exactly like what I'd been telling myself it was. Caleb kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't take anything from the store. I swear to you, I didn't take anything. His voice cracked on the last part. I'd never heard him sound like that before, not even close. At one point he looked straight at me and said, "Mom, please." Just those two words, and I still didn't say anything to defend him. I just stood there, frozen, watching it happen like it was on a television screen, instead of my own living room. But I'd already told the story. I'd already laid out the pattern. And once you've said something out loud to a police officer, it's not so easy to just take it back, even if some part of you is starting to doubt it. He was brought in for questioning as a juvenile, with me present the entire time, since the law requires a parent or guardian. I sat in that small room and watched my son, my actual son, the one I'd raised by myself since he was 7 years old, get asked questions like he was a stranger who might be dangerous. I want you to imagine what that does to a kid. Imagine being 16, sitting across from a police officer, while your own mother sits next to you, having already told everyone that she believes you did it. At one point during the questioning, the officer asked him directly, "Did you take money from the register at Riverside?" And Caleb looked over at me before answering, like he was checking whether there was any point in even trying. He said no. He said it quietly, but firmly, and the officer wrote something down on a notepad, without much reaction either way, the way people do when they've heard plenty of teenagers say plenty of things and learned to keep their face neutral until there's proof one way or the other. After that day, something between us broke that I genuinely didn't know how to fix. Caleb stopped talking to me. Not in a dramatic, slamming doors kind of way. It was quieter than that, and honestly scarier. He'd answer in one-word sentences. He stopped eating dinner with me. He started going straight to his room after school and staying there. Our old Tuesday pizza nights stopped completely. I tried to keep them going at first, ordering the same pizza from the same place, setting it out on the counter like nothing had changed, but he'd just take a slice up to his room instead of sitting with me. I remember standing in the kitchen alone those nights, eating in silence, staring at the spot at the table where he used to sit, wondering how something we'd done every week for years could just stop overnight. Word got around school, the way it always does in small communities. A few of his teammates on the baseball team heard about it, and the coach, trying to follow team policy around any kind of legal trouble, benched him from games while things were sorted out. Caleb loved baseball. It wasn't his whole identity, but it was one of the few things that made him light up, and now even that was gone too. I started noticing him flinch a little when I'd come into a room too fast. I started noticing he'd stopped leaving his door open the way he used to. Little things. Small distances that added up into something enormous. I'd lie awake at night replaying the conversation we'd had, replaying the way his face looked when the officers showed up. I told myself I'd done the right thing. I told myself good parents make hard calls. But somewhere underneath all that, a quieter voice kept asking me a question I didn't want to answer. What if he was telling the truth the whole time? The store still hadn't found any direct proof connecting Caleb to the actual missing cash. No footage of him at the register on the nights it came up short. No fingerprints, no confession, nothing concrete. Just circumstantial pieces that all seemed to point in his direction. The investigation was technically still open, moving slowly, the way these things often do. And during all that waiting, Caleb and I were barely speaking. The longer it dragged on, the more distant he got, and the more distant he got, the more I started to second-guess every single thing I thought I knew. About a week into all of this, a friend convinced me to at least talk to a lawyer, just to understand where things actually stood. I remember sitting in a small office with cheap carpet and a water cooler that hummed too loud, filling out paperwork with my son sitting beside me, not saying a word. The lawyer was kind, but blunt in the way professionals have to be sometimes. She explained that because Caleb was a juvenile and nothing had formally been filed as a criminal charge yet, we were really still in an early stage, an internal investigation more than anything else. She also said something I haven't forgotten. She said, cases like this, with a teenager, with circumstantial evidence like a key and some cash, they fall apart all the time once somebody actually looks closely. But the looking closely part can take time, and in the meantime, your son still has to live through it. She wasn't wrong. While we waited, neighbors who used to wave from their porches started looking the other way instead. One woman from 2 houses down actually pulled her own kid a little closer when they passed Caleb on the sidewalk, like he was something to be cautious of. Caleb noticed every single one of those small moments, even when he didn't say anything about them out loud. I noticed him noticing. I sat in that lawyer's office that day and felt, for the first time, the full weight of what I'd actually set into motion. Not just paperwork. Not just an investigation. A reputation. A version of my son that other people in our neighborhood were starting to believe in, one that wasn't true. About 2.5 weeks after the police first got involved, something happened that started pulling the whole thing apart. My manager called me into the office. The store had finally pulled a full month of register footage after corporate pushed for a complete audit, since the shortages hadn't actually stopped, even with Caleb banned from setting foot in the building and his key confiscated. That detail alone should have hit me harder than it did in the moment. The money was still going missing, and Caleb hadn't been anywhere near that store in weeks. I remember sitting in that little back office with the flickering fluorescent light overhead, the same office where I'd first brought up my suspicions about Caleb weeks earlier, and feeling a strange kind of dread building before the footage even started playing, like some part of me already knew what was coming. We sat and watched the footage together. Night after night of grainy black and white video. And there it was, plain as day. Not Caleb. It was the assistant manager, a man named Dale who'd worked there almost as long as I had, someone I'd trained with, someone I trusted enough to leave alone with the register on slow nights. The footage showed him quietly pocketing cash from the till during slower stretches, small amounts each time, careful, practiced, like he'd been doing it for a while and had it down to a routine. You could see him glance toward the security camera in the corner every single time, just for a half second, like he knew exactly where it was and exactly how to angle his body so it wouldn't catch much. My manager's face went pale watching it. She actually said out loud, almost to herself, "We let that boy take the blame for this." Mine probably went pale too, but for a completely different reason. Because in that exact moment, every piece of evidence I'd built against my own son started collapsing like a house made of cards in a windstorm. If Dale was the one taking the money from the store, then the cash Caleb had wasn't from the register at all. So where was it actually coming from? I didn't have to wait long to find out, because that same week, everything else came out too. I went home that night and I didn't even know how to start the conversation. I just sat down across from Caleb at the kitchen table and said, "It wasn't you. At the store. It was Dale. We have it on camera." He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't yell. He just sort of stared at the table for a long moment, and then he said, "I know I didn't take anything. I've been telling you that the whole time." Then I asked him the question I should have asked weeks earlier, the right way, with an open heart instead of a closed mind. "Then where has the cash been coming from? The sneakers, the phone case, all of it?" And finally, he told me the truth. There was an older man named Walt who lived a few blocks from us. Someone Caleb had started talking to months earlier, after noticing he was struggling, living out of his car in the church parking lot near our house. Caleb had started helping him without telling me, because he knew exactly how I'd react. He'd help Walt carry groceries, help him fill out paperwork for assistance programs, and in return, Walt insisted on paying him a little bit for the help, because he didn't want it to feel like charity going only one direction. On top of that, Caleb actually had been doing yard work for a man 2 streets over, exactly like he told me from the start, just not for as much money as the story implied, since most weeks it was barely $20 or $30. But here's the part that hit me the hardest. Caleb had been saving almost everything he earned, both from the yard work and from Walt, because Walt had told him about a community fundraiser trying to get him into transitional housing before winter hit. Caleb had been quietly putting money toward that fund, a little at a time, without telling a single soul, because he didn't want anyone making a big deal out of it, or treating Walt like a charity case in front of him. The sneakers and the phone case weren't even his. He'd bought them for Walt's grandson, a kid about 10 years old who Caleb had met a few times when Walt brought him along, a kid whose family was also struggling, whose shoes had holes worn clean through the bottom. My son, the one I had reported to the police, the one I had let officers question like a criminal, had spent the last few months quietly trying to help 2 people who had absolutely nothing, and the only thing he was guilty of was not telling his own mother because he was scared I'd either stop him, or worse, that I'd somehow make it about myself instead of about Walt. I sat there at that kitchen table and felt something break open in my chest that I don't think will ever fully close back up. A few nights later, once things had calmed down just enough for us to actually talk instead of just survive each conversation, I asked Caleb to tell me everything from the beginning, start to finish, no interruptions from me. He told me he met Walt back in early fall, walking home from baseball practice. Walt was sitting near the church with a cardboard sign, and most people just walked past him the way people do, but Caleb stopped and asked if he'd eaten that day. Walt said no. Caleb went into the gas station with the few dollars he had on him and bought him a sandwich and a bottle of water. After that, he just kept stopping. A few minutes here and there turned into actual conversations. Walt used to work construction before a back injury took that away from him, and one bad year turned into several worse ones, the way it sometimes does for people without much of a safety net underneath them. Caleb said Walt reminded him a little of his own grandfather, who passed away when Caleb was small, and that's part of why he kept coming back. He said the hardest part for him wasn't keeping it a secret from strangers. It was keeping it a secret from me. He said he almost told me a dozen different times, but every time he started to, he pictured exactly how it would go. Me worrying about a grown stranger spending time with my teenage son. Me telling him it wasn't his responsibility to fix. Me, in his words, making it a whole thing, when to him, it never felt like a thing at all. It just felt like the right way to treat another person. He looked at me when he said that last part, and I didn't have a single thing to say back, because he was right. If he'd come to me back in the fall and told me he wanted to spend his afternoons with a homeless man he met outside a church, I probably would have reacted with worry first and pride a distant second, if it showed up at all. Hearing him explain it all in his own voice, calm, steady, a little tired, made me realize something uncomfortable. The secrecy I'd read as guilt was never about hiding wrongdoing. It was about a 16-year-old trying to protect something good from being picked apart by an adult who he assumed, maybe correctly at the time, wouldn't fully understand it. I want to slow down here for a second, because I think this is the part that matters most. It's easy to watch this and think, well, that's a nice ending, the truth came out, everything's fine now. But I need you to understand that it wasn't fine. Truth coming out doesn't erase what already happened. My son had been searched by police. Questioned as a possible criminal. Pulled from his baseball team. Talked about by classmates and neighbors as that kid who got in trouble. All of that happened to a 16-year-old who, the entire time, was quietly trying to help a homeless man and his grandson without expecting a single thing back. And I was the one who set all of it in motion. I kept thinking about that moment in the doorway, when he looked at me before he looked at the officers. That look wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was a kid realizing, in real time, that the one person who was supposed to believe him no matter what hadn't even given him the chance to explain. I apologized to him that night, and it didn't feel like nearly enough. I told him I was sorry for not asking the right questions, sorry for assuming the worst, sorry for letting one mistake from when he was 13 color the way I saw every single thing he did after that. He didn't forgive me instantly. I don't think real forgiveness works that fast, and honestly, I wouldn't have trusted it if it had. He needed time. He needed to see, through actions and not just words, that I was actually going to listen to him going forward instead of building my own story in my head and treating it like fact. I also had to face my sister, the one I'd talked to before making the call, the one who'd told me tough love was the right move. I remember calling her and just saying, it wasn't him. It was never him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she said, I'm so sorry. I should have told you to talk to him first instead of telling you to go over his head. I appreciated her saying that, but it didn't change the fact that the call had been mine to make, and mine alone, and I was the one who'd have to live with what it cost. I also had to sit with a harder truth about myself, one that took longer to admit than anything else. Some part of me had wanted to be right. Not because I wanted Caleb to be guilty, never that, but because being right would have meant my instincts as a parent were sharp, that I could spot trouble before it spiraled. Being wrong meant admitting my fear had done more damage than any actual danger ever could have. That's a hard thing to look at in the mirror. The store, to their credit, moved fast once Dale's footage came to light. He was let go, and the matter was handed entirely over to the police as a separate case against him. Any record connected to Caleb from the original report was formally cleared, and because he was a juvenile and nothing had ever actually been filed as a formal charge against him, there was no lasting mark on his record at all. I want to pause on that for a second, because not every family gets that outcome. There are real cases out there where a young person gets accused, gets pulled into the system, and even when the truth eventually comes out, something still lingers. A record. A reputation. A permanent question mark that follows them around. We were lucky that it didn't go that far for Caleb. But lucky isn't the same as okay. The emotional weight of it stayed with both of us long after the paperwork was cleared. His coach reinstated him to the team once the situation was cleared up, and Caleb went back to playing, though it took him a few games before he started looking like himself out there again. Some of his teammates apologized for how they'd treated him during those few weeks. Others never really mentioned it at all, the way teenagers sometimes just move on without ever fully acknowledging what happened. Walt, when he found out what Caleb had been through because of trying to help him, was devastated. He came by the house himself to talk to me, an older man with kind, tired eyes, and he told me something I haven't forgotten. He said, "Your boy never once made me feel like a burden. Not one time. I just wanted you to know that, whatever else happened. That stuck with me more than almost anything else from that entire experience. As for Dale, his case moved forward separately through the legal system, the way it should have from the very beginning if the store had pulled that footage sooner, instead of letting suspicion land on a 16-year-old with a spare key and bad timing. It turned out he'd been quietly skimming small amounts for almost a year, money he later said he needed to cover medical bills for his wife, which didn't excuse what he did, but did explain why someone I'd worked beside for years felt he had no other option than to take what wasn't his. It was a strange kind of lesson on its own, watching someone else's secret desperation play out right alongside my own son's secret kindness. Two completely different reasons for two people to hide something from the people around them. If you're a parent watching this, I want to share what I actually took away from all of it, because I think it matters more than the story itself. The first thing is this. Circumstantial evidence feels a lot more convincing than it actually is when you're scared. Every single piece of proof I had against Caleb turned out to have a completely innocent explanation. The cash, the lateness, the secrecy, all of it. But fear doesn't wait around for full explanations. Fear grabs the first story that fits and runs with it. The second thing is this. A scared kid and a guilty kid can look exactly the same on the outside. Defensiveness isn't proof of guilt. Sometimes it's proof that your child feels like they're not being heard, or that they're protecting something they're not ready to explain yet. The third thing, and honestly the hardest one for me to admit, is that one mistake a kid makes when they are 13 does not define who they are at 16, or 18, or 25. I let that trading card incident sit in the back of my mind for years, quietly shaping how I interpreted everything Caleb did afterward. That's not fair to a kid who's growing and changing every single day. People aren't frozen in their worst moment. We have to let them grow past it. And the last thing, maybe the most important one, is that asking the right question matters, just as much as asking the question at all. I asked Caleb, is something going on, in a tone that already sounded like an accusation. If I'd sat down and genuinely, calmly asked him to walk me through where the money was coming from, without that edge of suspicion in my voice, I think he would have told me the truth a lot sooner. Kids can feel the difference between a parent who's curious and a parent who's already decided. If you want the short version, the version you can actually carry around with you, here's what I'd boil it down to. Before you accuse, ask, and actually mean it as a question. Leave space for an answer you didn't expect. Notice your own tone before you notice theirs. Old mistakes shouldn't get a permanent vote in new situations. A 13-year-old mistake is not evidence at 16. People change faster than our memory of them does. Defensiveness is information, not proof. Scared and guilty can look the same from across a kitchen table. Slow down before you decide which one you're looking at. Secrecy usually has a reason behind it. Sometimes that reason is shame. Sometimes, like with Caleb, it's protecting something kind from being misunderstood. I also want to say something about how trust actually works, because I didn't fully understand this until I lived through it. Trust isn't really one big thing. It's made up of hundreds of small moments, little deposits and withdrawals you barely notice happening. Calling the police on Caleb wasn't one withdrawal. It was closer to wiping out the entire account in a single afternoon. And rebuilding it didn't happen with one big apology either. It happened the same way it broke, in small moments, over and over. Me showing up differently the next time something looked suspicious, me asking instead of assuming, until eventually those small deposits started to add back up. It's been a while since all of this happened, and Caleb and I are in a much better place now. It didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of long conversations, a lot of me actively working to listen instead of assume, and a lot of patience from him toward me, more patience than I probably deserved at times. He still helps Walt when he can. Walt eventually got into stable housing through that fundraiser Caleb had been quietly contributing to, and his grandson still wears out sneakers faster than anyone can keep up with, the way kids that age always do. Caleb actually brought me along to meet them properly not long after everything settled, no longer hiding it, and watching the three of them together, watching how easily Walt's grandson lit up around my son. I finally understood the part of this story I'd missed the whole time. This was never about money. It was about a kid who saw someone struggling and decided, quietly and without needing credit for it, to do something about it. Caleb finished out that baseball season, and even though it took him a while to feel comfortable in the locker room again, he made it through. He's older now, more guarded with me in some ways than he used to be, and I understand exactly why, even if it still stings sometimes. I think about that day the officers came to our door more often than I'd like to admit. I think about the look on his face. I think about how easy it is, as a parent, to convince yourself that fear and love are the same thing, when really, fear without trust can do just as much damage as the very thing you're trying to prevent. There's a conversation Caleb and I had a few months after everything settled that I still think about a lot. We were driving home from one of his games, and out of nowhere he asked me, "Do you think you would have believed me if I'd told you the truth from the start?" I didn't answer right away, because I wanted to give him an honest answer instead of a comfortable one. Eventually I told him, honestly, I don't know. I'd like to think so. But I also know I was already looking for a reason not to. He nodded, didn't say much else, but I think he respected that I didn't try to make myself look better than I was in that moment. That's maybe the hardest part of telling this story. It would be easier to wrap it up neatly, to say we talked it through once and everything healed instantly, the two of us hugging it out under some perfect sunset. Real life doesn't really work that way. What actually happened is slower and messier. Some weeks were better than others. Some nights he still seemed far away, lost in his own head, and I had to remind myself to give him room instead of pushing. Trust doesn't rebuild on a schedule. It rebuilds in its own time, whenever it's ready, and a parent's job is mostly just to keep showing up consistently enough that it eventually feels safe to come back. If you're a parent listening to this and something in your gut is telling you a version of this story might be playing out in your own house right now, I'd ask you to do one thing before anything else. Sit down with your kid, put the phone away, and ask the question without already knowing the answer in your head. You might be surprised by what you actually hear when you finally make room for it. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's that the people closest to us deserve our questions before they deserve our conclusions. I learned that lesson in about the hardest way a parent can learn it. I hope you never have to learn it the same way I did. If you like this story and want to hear more real-life family drama stories, click the video on screen right now. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves.